Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Michael Weber returns to the show for 1957's Paths of Glory.
Our guest today is the co-writer of 500 Days of Summer, The Spectacular Now, The Fault in Our Stars, and The Disaster Artist. Michael H. Weber returns to the show, this time to discuss Paths of Glory. Michael, thank you so much for joining us again.
Guys, thanks for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here again. Another Kirk Douglas film.
Yeah, yes.
Always happy to talk about Kirk, and I'm glad it's with someone we've had a good conversation with before. God, I'm so happy I got to watch this movie because, not to peel the curtains back a little too much, but the next two movies, one of which in particular is not going to be fun.
Those are coming out later, though. We've got to record.
No, I know. I'm not going to say what. I'm just saying we are, in the next 2 days, going to have to do some work on some heavy bullshit.
We can just own it. Michael, this is the highlight of our week because our next recording we have to talk about The Birth of a Nation. So no matter how rough seeing people get blown up in trenches is in this film, let's just acknowledge this somehow became the lighthearted film for us this week. Michael, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for not inviting me to that one.
Well, that was actually, it's funny when we talked about this, when you and I were first talking about doing this show, you were like, well, let me ask you before I get into it, are you guys going to do the tough ones? Like, are you going to do like the ones that have the tougher conversations like Birth of a Nation, Annie Hall, or are you skipping over? I'm like, no, we're committed to every one. And, either that encouraged you to come join us or you still joined us despite your better judgment. I don't know which one it was, but either way, we are thrilled to have you on again.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to be here.
You were last here, as you mentioned, for Out of the Past, which is a Robert Mitchum, Kirk Douglas noir film. And actually, on that episode, without even knowing what we had in the next season, you talked about your love of Paths of Glory. So we were very much like, well, let's lock that guy in. Let's.
I can't remember how the how long into his filmography was this one for Kirk Douglas, because the last time it was maybe his second or third film. Third or fourth. It was an early role for him, if I'm remembering correct.
So by this point,
check that out.
While Tom's pulling it up, I can test. At this point, Kirk Douglas had power, right? He had sway because this comes together because Kirk Douglas. So Kubrick, at this point, had only made 3 films, right? He had made Fear and Desire, which is his first film that he says people shouldn't watch, and if you've seen it, you would also say people shouldn't watch it. It's not great. Killer's Kiss, which is like a low budget thing, and then The Killing. But Kubrick had been working on a script for Paths of Glory, and Kirk Douglas by this point found Kubrick's script and was an admirer of The Killing. So it was Douglas who actually sort of spearheads, let's get this young guy, young up and comer, and let's make this movie.
Okay, so I got the Kirk Douglas filmography up here. This is 10 years after Out of the Past, actually, which that was, like we said, his third movie. So he's picked up a lot of steam in the 10 years since Out of the Past. He's done movies like I Walk Alone, Champion, which he was nominated for Best Actor for at the Academy Awards. He does stuff like Ace in the Hole and Detective Story, The Bad and the Beautiful. He does 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He does Lust for Life, another Academy Award nomination for the fella. And then in 1957, he does 3 movies. He does Top Secret Affair, Gunfight at the OK Corral, and the movie we're talking about today, Paths of Glory. Quite the year, quite the 10 years, to be honest. It is crazy to think about, like, this feels like something you would get when someone's like 20 years into their career and they're really like established and they can do a lot, and you just look at how quick he hit and how much power he amassed so quickly that it really does kind of make you really sit back and appreciate what a talent Kirk was, and that we're lucky that the industry actually used him right and appreciated him instead of being another guy who's like, well, he's talented, but he's not picking the right roles, or he's just got this look that's not right, or but one of the many myriad reasons Hollywood could just not turn you into a success story. And yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's the guy that makes Kubrick, because it's not just this, but it's working on this that gets him to be like, hey, I need someone to replace the director on Spartacus. Can you step in and do that? And argument to be made, if it wasn't for Spartacus, does Kubrick really have the free reign that he ends up getting like after this stretch of his career? Because I mean, Spartacus is a huge movie, whether you like it or not, or don't, or if you like it but don't put it high on the Kubrick filmography or whatever, it's like indisputable. Big movie, big hit, all sorts of accolades. Does Kubrick get that stretch of road after this where he really does kind of become Kubrick if it wasn't for Kirk Douglas being like, I like this guy. Let's get him going and being a guy that I work with only twice, but Kubrick famously doesn't work with people multiple times, so we're kind of lucky we got the two out of them.
I mean, I would have loved to have seen Kirk Douglas's Lolita, quite frankly. I think that would have been
honestly
what a different movie we get at that point.
I mean, honestly, maybe feels a little more closer to the tone of the novel than the weird, like, hey, isn't it kind of quirky and fun that this guy's trying to date a little girl?
I'm going to be real with you, Tom. That is the clearest sign that you have not read the novel. If you think that Kirk Douglas's rippling masculinity is really what Nabokov had going on,
I don't know. It would have been another case of Stanley Kubrick calling his shot and being like, hey, he's almost like an Andrew Tate character.
But by the way, to your earlier point, here's Kirk Douglas, one of the biggest stars on earth at this point, and he's using his stardom to champion young filmmakers, to get challenging material made. I read somewhere there was a conversation he and Kubrick had early about the sort of commercial prospects of this film, and they both knew this was not something they were making thinking there was ever any chance it would be a hit. It's not what drove them to make this film. So, credit to Kirk Douglas that when he had all this power, he was using it to make films like this.
Yeah,
and working with auteurs and guys with real visions, and like a discussion we talked about in the Out of the Past episode, that he plays a villain in that, but he's a charming villain where you kind of forget that he's a piece of shit. But that you see in these 10 years, even though he's becoming a bigger and bigger star, and he may have like a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in that run, he's still like some of the big stuff he's doing, like. He's a piece of shit in Champion. He's a piece of shit in Ace in the Hole. One of the biggest pieces of shit in 50 cinema in Ace in the Hole. He's kind of a dirty cop in Detective Story. He's a scumbag producer in The Bad and the Beautiful. He's got a bit of an edge in this, even though he's a hero. Like, he's a good guy in this, the only moral man in this story. He's got enough of an edge where you're like, oh, he might actually take a swing at this general.
Hey, listen, Ned Land in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, bit of a scallywag. I'm just saying.
He's a scallywag, but he is a charming, straight ahead hero. Where Kirk, shockingly enough, in this era of Hollywood, was able to carve a niche for himself as a guy with an edge. Like like most of the big stars, he knew what his persona was. Like, he knew what he looked like, and it's like, yeah, I'm a good looking guy, but there's like this weird granite kind of tough guy, sleazy charm to me, where let me use that, where I can switch from being a hero to a bad guy, but my heroes can have edges to them, and my bad guys can have a little more charm than you expect like these guys to have. I mean, it's one of the that's why he's like my favorite of that era. He's just so versatile without ever being like one of those method guys that has to like change his voice and like, learn how to walk with like a limp or some bullshit. It's just like, no, he's always Kirk, but just finding those degrees within himself is like, it's always a pleasure watching a movie with this guy, whether it's a rewatching like this one and finding the nuances I didn't see the first time, or just any new movie where you go, God, this guy really was the best.
Well, I think
I'm curious. Oh, sorry.
No,
I'm
please.
curious. How old were you guys the first time you saw this film? Because I think I was a freshman in college,
Hmm.
and I've seen it a few more times over the years, and I obviously rewatched it recently before coming on the podcast. To me, it's interesting how uh, um, harrowing it was watching it as a teenager, and yet I feel like my perspective on it has evolved as well over the years. I'm curious how old you guys were the first time both of you saw it.
So I was in college. I don't know if I was like a freshman or sophomore. So the reason I ended up seeing it, actually, I had mistakenly been under the impression that like Stanley Kubrick's filmography really starts with Strangelove, right? Not
Hmm.
that, mainly because like when people talk about Kubrick, right? And they talk about that distinctive style, that distinctive look, right? They start with Strangelove, right? They start with when he had full control, when it was a Stanley Kubrick picture, right? And Spartacus, while he obviously directed it, you know, especially if you're a young person and you've just watched 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange, and then you watch Spartacus, you're like, this feels different.
Hmm.
This feels like maybe he hasn't established like the Kubrick style. So Passive Glory was one of those ones that I suppose in my mind I had treated similar to like it came before Spartacus. I'll get to it one day, but like I want the stuff that's got the real juice. The way I ended up finding it was it must have been freshman year actually. Weirdly around that time, Empire magazine, the British film magazine, published this list of the 500 greatest films, right? And as a freshman in film school, I was like, well, this would be a good way to kind of like wet my beak in like what people are talking about. Now, if you actually look at this list today, you're not going to call it the 500 greatest films. It was an online voted on list, and I don't mean to disparage anybody's taste, but I don't think anybody today is going to go, yes, Superman Returns and Transformers.
Oh
Absolutely.
well, bro.
Pirates of
Even
the
at the time, that
Caribbean,
was the
Dead Man's
conversation.
Chest, right in there.
I remember having those at the
Yeah.
time, having the conversations with you of where
It's like,
both of us were just like, "What the fuck is this?"
was only one Ingmar Bergman movie on that list, but they made sure to get Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. Anyway, Paths of Glory was on there, and I, got it as a disc from Netflix, watched it, and was blown away by it from the jump. Just like, it was a real feeling of, it's weirdly like, this is a movie that stars one of the biggest movie stars in film history, directed by one of the most revered directors. And yet, when you watch Paths of Glory, at least to me, like you get this feeling of where has this been hiding all this time? You
Yeah.
know, where is this? Because it doesn't get talked about in the Kirk Douglas filmography. It doesn't get brought up the way that things like Spartacus or Ace in the Hole, or any of those come up. It doesn't come up as immediately. And in the Kubrick filmography, people are always talking about, like, again, the 2001, the Clockwork Orange, the real, the stuff that's always in the box sets, right? So it feels like this, it feel no matter how you come to it, it feels like a discovery in a way,
Hmm.
which I thought was very cool. What about you, Tom? What was your first time?
I can't remember the exact date. It's definitely at least 10 years ago because I don't have the first time I watched it logged on Letterboxd, and I remember going as far as I can in like a journal I used to have. So might have been college time. I just looked up the release date of the Criterion Blu-ray, which was 2010, and even back then I was still doing the thing of if a movie in the Criterion collection sounded interesting, I'll pick it up during the Barnes and Noble 50% off
Hmm.
sale. I was doing that even back then. That's why my wall looks like this. I've been this psychotic for at least 14 years now. So it must have been around then, and I think it was even before my Kirk Douglas fandom really kicked in. It was more just being like that weird OCD film fan thing of wanting to complete a big director's filmography. And I always had and still do have a complicated relationship with Kubrick. I don't love most of his stuff. I like a good bit of it. I think some of it's wildly overpraised. Um, but I was still like, I still want to get to all of it just to have the complete picture, just so I can talk about it. And at the time when I finally watched it, I was like, oh, this is his best movie. Like kind of like Mike said, where has this been? Why is nobody talking about this? Why do I have to hear about 2001 and the Brit rapist movie? I don't, enough of this. And at the time, and even now, it almost makes me go, why did he even do Full Metal Jacket? He did it already. He did this. Like, as much as I like Full Metal Jacket, there you go. As much as I like the Full Metal Jacket, the first half in particular, it almost feels like you did your war movie. Why did you do it again?
Well,
and you don't have Kirk Douglas this time, but back then, my favorite Kubrick. Rewatching it today, it's still my favorite Kubrick. I think it's just a perfect little package, man. It's 88 minutes. It doesn't have any fat on it. The thematic, satirical work about war and class and all of that stuff is there without ever being didactic. Like, you kind of have to do a lot of work to not see the points he's making. But it's entertaining. It's distressing at points. And again, it's 88 minutes. You get a complete full package where you just understand everyone and everybody without lavish backstories or flashbacks or didactic speeches. It's just, I get it. We're in, we're out. The point is made, and you feel like you just got hit with a haymaker at the end, and you're like, fuck, this was so good.
I mean, I do think it's interesting, though, Tom, because you brought up Full Metal Jacket, which obviously this movie exists in conversation both with Full Metal Jacket and with Doctor Strangelove, right? In different ways, right?
Yes.
But one of the things that I think is interesting, and I Michael, you acknowledged like feeling differently about it as the years go on, right? And evolving in that way. This time around, the thing that struck me watching it, and I was, with Full Metal Jacket, is that for me, I wonder if part of the reason he made Full Metal Jacket is that Full Metal Jacket is a movie where he wanted to talk about Vietnam, and he made it about the Vietnam War. The more I sit with Paths of Glory, the more I come to grips with the idea that I don't know if Paths of Glory at its heart is a World War I movie.
No.
It's obviously it's set in World War I as the story, but Kubrick inserts enough things. What unlocked it for me in a weird way was two things. One, realizing this is the same year as Bridge on the River Kwai. Which is David Lean, one of our other great filmmakers, and both of them trying to go, we just had a war happen like 10 years ago, a little more than 10 years ago, and it was what we would call the most just war and the most moral war, right? We can't really make a movie about how horrible what occurred in World War II, like the death or the carnage. We can't do that on its face. People would not tolerate that. But shit went down. And I look at what really clicked into me watching it was the realization of when the Adolphe Monjou's character, right, is going through the trenches. He talks to the guys who were going to follow, like Timothy Carey and all that, but he also talks to a guy with what they, at that time, called shell shock, right?
Yeah.
He talks to a shell-shocked man. This is not in the book. This is not in anything. And Adolphe Monjou says he doesn't believe in shell shock, and he slaps the guy. That's not World War. That's George S. Patton.
Yep.
That is a real incident from George S. Patton. And I think that was one of the things is like, while Paths of Glory is, an exceptional film, you also feel like this is like Kubrick getting as close as he can to analyzing World War II, to analyzing that period and that conflict. By the time you get to Full Metal Jacket or even Dr. Strangelove, he's getting more on the nose and he's attacking the actual conflict that he wants to address,
Well, I think in a way, this Paths of Glory, that's why Paths of Glory to me feels more in conversation with Dr. Strangelove. Mm-hmm. In that there's that moment towards the end of Paths of Glory where one of the generals is talking about, the pressure from the politicians and the media and all that kind of stuff. And in a way, obviously the tone is completely different, but Dr. Strangelove is a glimpse into all that other stuff that's only briefly alluded to towards the end of Paths of Glory. Now you're seeing the other side of war, the people who are so far away from the actual conflict.
And, with that, you mentioned that in the novel that this is based on, I believe, the cause of them taking that hill is different. At least in the film version, they're taking the hill, and it's basically a suicide mission to anybody who's doing it, right? But you can at least believe that somebody thinks it's gonna work, right? You can at least believe.
Well, that's why I love that shot early on where when the two generals are talking about the mission initially at the very beginning of the movie, I mean, they must walk 3 miles in that scene. They just wander around in circles, and they are just walking and moving, and they're going nowhere.
Yeah.
And it really kind of previews everything to come in a way.
Meanwhile, apparently, and I have not read the novel. It was hard for me to track down, but in the commentary track on the Criterion, the man doing the commentary says that in the novel, the reason that they initiate this mission to take the hill is that it had already leaked to the press that they had taken the hill. That the newspapers had reported that they'd already done it, and rather than try and get the newspapers to retract it and look weak, they were like, well, I guess we have to do it now. Like, that essentially they're throwing these guys into the gunfire because, well, it would really hurt our reputation if we had to say this victory was fake.
Well, that's a thing of, I don't want to say one is better than the other, because I do think that is a great inciting incident for the taking of the hill and gets to the thematic things going on in this story of how war really isn't about doing anything good. It's just like politics and middle managers trying to get promotions, and they look down upon the guys that are actually doing the fighting, and they just see them as, grist for the fucking war machine. Like the main general that incites all this, and he walks through the trenches, and it's like, this is the closest he's going to get to the fight. He really, you get the sense he really has no idea what this is going to mean to any of these guys. But which is, I think, is a great bit in the beginning, which is he starts off like, well, no, this is a losing battle, we're going to lose a lot of men, these are our men, we can't do that. But once it then becomes, well, I was going to put you up for a promotion, just, I'm not going to say I'm not putting you up for a promotion and that it will affect you getting the promotion if you don't do it. I'm just saying it's there. And then the switch flips, and it becomes just, well, if I got to throw some guys to the fucking no man's land and they get mowed down, well, that's the cost of doing business. I want to get a promotion, and I'm going to make it seem like I'm doing it for moral reasons, that I'm doing it for the good cause and all of this. But no, none of this. And again, the brilliant thing about the ending is that the other general is so convinced that Kirk is doing everything he's doing for political gain, and he realizes, oh no, you are an idealist, I feel bad for you, and Kirk is ready to strangle this fucking guy. And it just kind of wraps everything up in a neat bow of just, right, unless only the guys on the front lines are actually fighting the war. Everyone else is just fighting a little proxy battle to get better jobs.
Well, it makes me think about, with that, one thing I think about that's a historical kind of connection is, Ulysses Grant, right? General, later President Ulysses Grant. Now, we all learned in school, we're all of a similar age group, where one of the things we learned at some point was Grant was an alcoholic. Right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows Grant was an alcoholic. But the more you research, and especially as new scholarship comes along, his reputation as an alcoholic, yeah, he certainly drank. No one's saying he didn't drink. But
hell yeah,
he got this reputation as an alcoholic because people around D.C., people who never set foot on the battlefield in a lot of cases, saw Grant and saw this guy who basically couldn't sleep without getting blackout drunk, right? And we're like, well, he's a degenerate alcoholic. And modern scholarship talks about, well, the reality is Grant drank because he had what we now call PTSD. Because Grant saw so much carnage and has talked about it in his memoirs and all that. Grant was profoundly affected by what he saw out there, and he had a hard time for the rest of his life relating to people who talked to him about war like it was a chess game, or like it was something to earn medals, or something to be valorous. And in reality, like, this was a man who was, despite being, maybe our greatest war hero, I mean, all of us are New Yorkers to one degree or another. You can just his goddamn tomb looks like Napoleon's, right? Like, he was the most venerated, but he was haunted by it. And I think what Douglas kind of represents in this movie is that same idea of, like, he actually remembers the cost of war.
Well, that's going back to your point about World War One. It's kind of a World War One story, but not really. It kind of just represents all war. It does make me think that making it a World War One story fits that idea you just went on about these guys that don't actually know what Grant went through, that it's just a chess game to them. Because this is a conversation we have a lot, because I'm fascinated by World War One. That was like the first modern war. So a lot of the older guys, the generals and higher up colonels and whatnot, they kind of got there through a different means. So this is a conflict and a concept of war that doesn't even register to them. So even if they got in and fought some, like, whatever skirmishes in, like, the late 1800s or whatever, they didn't really fight any wars. Now they're actually in a war. If you set it in World War II, you would kind of have this weird thing of, well, we do know that a lot of the guys that are 50s, 60s, kind of leading things, we do know they probably fought in World War One. They probably have real actual experience. Setting it here makes it even clearer that, again, it takes away the noble war aspect, so you can get that this is a war that really just didn't make any sense. So you get the war is madness theme, but just makes it even cleaner that, well, the guys making decisions, especially in this war, really didn't know what they were doing, didn't even grasp the weight of what the conflict was. And that's why it was just like, 5 years of guys fighting for 2 inches of mud and just watching people get mowed down because these dickheads didn't even know what was really going on.
No, there's a real upstairs, downstairs quality to the
Yeah.
film. Like, in addition to all of the sort of anti-war ideas in the movie, there is this idea about sort of the aristocracy and, like, they're not sacrificing much and they're not getting their hands dirty, and it's taking place at various levels. I mean, you even see it with Ralph Meeker and is it Wayne Morris, who plays. They went to school together, but you could tell they come from different backgrounds, and that's why one of them is an officer and one of them is not. And, like, it's just throughout the film that dichotomy is present in a bunch of different relationships.
And I think
that stuff really hit me because, again, I haven't watched this in years.
Yeah,
all the class stuff really landed even harder this time. Like the stuff you said, the guys that went to school together, and one was clearly just a rich kid and he's an idiot, and that's why the poor guy doesn't really respect them. It's, you're only here because of your money. There's one scene
I forgot
where
there was a movie about class. Like, I had completely even having seen it 3 or 4 times already before recently rewatching it, it never sticks with me. Oh yeah, this is also about class in a way that is really powerful.
Because the one general that's kind of I don't remember his name, but the older general that is kind of giving the main general, like, the orders, and kind of the one at the end who Kirk has it out with. There's even, like, a bit where he's just like, "Oh, this isn't about whatever." He says something along the lines of, "This isn't about officers. This isn't related to what officers have to deal with. This is about the soldiers, and we're going to sacrifice soldiers." When Kirk says, "Well, why don't you just pick me? Why do you need 100 guys? Why do you even need 12 guys? Pick me." It's like, well, this isn't about officers. And you go, oh, right. You guys aren't actually trying to solve a problem. You don't actually believe what you're saying. You're just, well, we have enough of these, guys we could just throw into the fucking fire and it's not going to matter. And we just, that's not what officers do. We don't get killed. We don't get thrown into the into the fucking pit. We don't get put in front of the firing squad. We just do that to other people. You know, we're gentlemen. We wear our suits and we have parties while a fucking court case just got settled that is just kangaroo court nonsense, sentencing 3 men to death because one guy is desperate for a promotion and then was going to bomb his own guys but was superseded. So, well, we need a court case to make this seem like I didn't fuck up.
Well, and
It's like, what?
the other thing we're talking about with these officers, and it's something that time has made it even more poignant, but the palace that these officers are meeting in, right?
Mhm.
That is the Schleichheim Palace in Munich, where they shot this, right?
Nice pronunciation there.
Thank you.
So, one of the things that made me nervous talking about this movie is there's a lot of things I definitely am going to mispronounce.
That's
so,
fine.
Well done.
We're all just going to wing it. But one thing I thought was interesting is I looked weirdly when I was watching it. It did look familiar to me, and I was trying to figure out why, right? And I just kind of in my head was like, well, maybe this is like what Kubrick modeled the Human Zoo in 2001 off. And then looking it up, that is the same place where years later Alain Renaud films Last Year at Marienbad, which
that's right,
makes it so evocative because whereas Last Year at Marienbad is basically like these, depending on your read of it, are the ghosts of these impossibly posh upper crust people who exist to just wander this palace pointlessly. And there is something so remarkable about the way that this film cuts from the Last Year at Marienbad Palace right to this dirty, war-torn battlefield with this crashed airplane in the side of the road.
But that's where I do think, even though you have Spartacus coming after this, so many of the Kubrick trademark visual styles and choices, you could start to see them here in a way they're a little harder to find before this movie. Such as going from those palaces to then the claustrophobia of the trenches, like that. That the way that he even shoots those scenes in the palace, harkens to a lot of his later work.
And it's and you got this because Paths of Glory really fits into that thing, and I it feels silly for me of all people to be saying this to you, Michael, because this is of course the sweet spot of somebody in your industry, but it's. Paths of Glory is the film that I think every, upstart filmmaker or screenwriter wants, which is I want something where you give me enough money that I can do what I want, but not so much that you tell me what to do, right? And Spartacus is the further out version of that. Spartacus, people are, they're putting a ton of money into this, People are watching the dailies. I'm confident there's some things that Kubrick shot for Spartacus that some guy chomping a cigar walked down and went, what the hell is this? Just give me a close-up of Kirk doing a smile. What is this crap? But Paths of Glory is just the right level of budget where he can do what he wants to do.
And he has that protection because he has that star.
Yes.
I mean, it's like if you have the meaningful piece of talent in your corner, even to this day, yes, you get a little more leeway to go make the thing you want to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's such a, so that's where we start to see his voice, Kubrick's voice emerge, right? And him start to really figure out, his authorial style. I mean, you can see, I would say to that, it's the first one where it's obvious. You can watch The Killing and you can see elements of what we're going to kind of call the stereotypical Kubrick style. You can even see bits and pieces of it if you really want in Fear and Desire. But this is the one where you don't have to explain yourself to somebody if you claim a certain scene has that Kubrick feel. It's very you feel
this
it.
This is very this really is very Kubrick because the battle scenes do feel like the early test run stuff of the battle scenes in Full Metal Jacket. All the stuff inside these palaces has that sort of bouncing between the regality of Barry Lyndon and some of the off-puttingness of the Overlook and The Shining. May not be getting that complete symmetrical filmmaking style he becomes obviously known for, but the filming in these palaces and all that has a sense of class and regality that is a little surprising for the era and for a movie of its smaller budget. especially in comparison to how dirty and gritty the war scenes really do feel. That yeah, you do. I mean, that's why this is just like Mike said. This really is like the first Stanley Kubrick movie, and not a movie made by Stanley Kubrick. This is the starting point, and not all the auteurs take a few movies to get to this point. Like he had Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, and The Killing really kind of like warming up, but
Well,
there was really no looking back after this.
it's interesting because it kind of parallels a different film we talked about earlier this season, which is Sam Peckinpah's Ride the High Country.
Yeah.
Which is, we did Ride the High Country, and similarly, like, Paths of Glory doesn't often get brought up when people are talking about Kubrick, right? Because he hasn't fully become Stanley Kubrick yet, right? The things that you would parody about a Kubrick movie are not in this. Similar to, like, if you watch Ride the High Country, you're not going to see anything that you would stereotype Sam Peckinpah for, right? Randolph Scott does not have just gushing fountains of blood coming out of him or anything. But when you sit down and watch them, you look at it and go, oh, I am seeing all of the trademarks of what you do. And it's funny because Tom and I have contrasting views on both Peckinpah and Kubrick. One of the things I said on Ride the High Country is I'm like, well, I love this. This is my favorite Peckinpah because it's all of the thematic things that Sam Peckinpah does before he takes all of those things and cranks them up to 11, and I find it irksome. And I think, Tom, for you, similarly, like, this is all of the stuff that, this has all of the elements of, like, classic Kubrick, but without taking it to the level where you start to get annoyed.
Well,
Is
yeah,
that fair?
he's not showing off. Like, that's kind of my problem with a lot of the later Kubrick movies, is I think he's not even cranking it to 11 because it's just a lot of showing off. But either way, it is funny because Peckinpah is a good example of that, because he may have only made that one movie we discovered he made before Ride the Country, which was like, oh, he probably just did that as a jobber.
Yeah,
Like, there was no real
thing.
But he was a TV guy. He had to make his bones in TV the way Kubrick had to kind of do photography and then bounce around a few movies and then find Kirk Douglas, where Peckinpah had to find a different avenue to become the guy we eventually know. Both two guys with very distinctive styles, very distinctive thematic interests, and very easy to parody. And two guys that pretty much changed cinema in the 60s in vastly different ways. Sci-fi is not the same after 2001, and just any movie with violence is not the same after The Wild Bunch. To take away the Westerns, how he reimagined Westerns, just, we talked about it last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever the fuck, with violence is just, you can't make an action movie and not be like, well, would Peckinpah be annoyed at the squibs in this movie? If he would, well, do him better.
Before we go any further, I just realized we got so deep into this discussion and we've not done the thing we normally do. So before we expound further on what we think of Paths of Glory, let's talk about what the Library of Congress thought of Paths of Glory. Here's what the National Film Registry had to say about Paths of Glory.
Based on Humphrey Cobb's novel about 3 French soldiers played on film by Joe Turkel, Ralph Meeker, and Timothy Carey, on trial for cowardice during World War I, the film established Stanley Kubrick as an influential director. Adapted by Kubrick, Calder Willingham, and Jim Thompson, the screenplay chillingly spotlights the arrogance and incompetence of military leaders, 3 of which are portrayed by Adolph Menjou, George Macready, and Wayne Morris. Though decidedly anti-war, the film does not espouse pacifism, exemplifying this contradiction in the character passionately portrayed by Kirk Douglas as the officer defending the unjustly charged soldiers.
So the thing that sticks out to me about that statement that is entirely accurate and I think doesn't get talked about enough is I think that Paths of Glory, if it's discussed, gets put in the same box as some very different films, calling it anti-war and calling it pacifist. And I think they make a great point that this is not a pacifist movie. This is not anti-military even. This is not anti-war. This is a movie that is like Kirk Douglas's whole role in this movie is to basically go, there are rules. Follow the rules. You know? Like basically that's what makes the trial so compelling is that he's like, well, you didn't let me call witnesses. You didn't let me do this. Doesn't make sense. This doesn't follow the rules, you know?
But I think there's a difference between anti-war and pacifism.
Mhm.
I think you can make an anti-war film, and that's not necessarily saying, well, this is promoting pacifism.
Mhm. Yes.
Like, I think, that's, to me, an extra leap. There's a famous Truffaut quote. He said, it was impossible to make an anti-war movie because action argues in favor of itself.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that quote comes to mind when I think about Bridge on the River Kwai, the same year, which also in a way is an anti-war film. And yet there are stretches of Bridge on the River Kwai that are thrilling in different ways. There's some action. There's this camaraderie. There's a spirit to the movie at points that I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's not fully anti-war. Whereas the twisted horror logic of Paths of Glory to me makes it feel like an anti-war film, where it's not espousing pacifism, but it can still be anti-war.
See, one of my favorite examples of when this kind of conversation comes up and it's Saving Private Ryan, which a lot of people like to ding for its muddied message of it wants to be anti-war, but it's very let's fight the Nazis, and that it's good that they're doing all this. And I find that kind of messaging a little more apropos of real life, because you can be anti-war while also acknowledging that sometimes war is going to happen, and if it is, kind of like this movie saying, is there are rules. You have to follow the rules, otherwise what are we even doing? You have to be a human being. Like, if you're fighting a war, it's ostensibly because of a noble cause. Whatever side you're on, you think you're doing the right thing. Nobody even on the Nazi side, they didn't think they were doing bad things. They thought they were being noble, and they had their rules, and they followed their rules.
I mean, it's even to that degree, though. Like, think about, because obviously Kubrick makes a Vietnam movie, right?
Yes.
And one of the things about Vietnam that made it such a turn point time in America about the war is, regardless of whether you think the cause is noble or not, right? Regardless, and obviously nobody was punished as much as they should have been at all, but when the story of the My Lai massacre came out, even some of the most grizzled veterans were like, what the fuck are you doing? What is that? You don't do that. Even the people who firmly believed, and not all of them, there were some weirdos, but even like some of the people, like conservative people in DC at the time, who firmly believed in like, we need to be in Vietnam to stop communism, heard about what Tiger Squad did and were like, what? This is not we cannot do this. This is not okay. And I think that Paths of Glory, that's what Kirk Douglas represents, is this way of like, he is, there's that point when he's in the trenches and he's yelling like, let's give it another shot, right? He is not necessarily like, he's not Private Joker in Full Metal Jacket, right? He is not like, well, man, I don't know about this war. He's, a believer in the cause to one degree or another. But when they're basically going like, well, we're just going, for the sake of making a message, we're going arbitrarily pick 3 men. They're going to be killed in the name of cowardice. Douglas is basically, they're going, well, there's no need for this. This is, even if you believe in the conflict, there's no need for this course of action.
Well, yeah, because even when he's told about they're going to take the anthill, he says, like, this doesn't really make sense. Like, this is kind of a bad idea. Like, we don't even have the necessary, like support. We don't have enough guys. We like all of this. But, that's the orders. This is the army. I'm following the orders. I may not agree with it. But, hey, maybe there is a chance we can survive this if we, put our French heads down and just barrel ahead. But to counter, like exactly like you said, this trial doesn't make sense. We had no way forward. They weren't being cowards. Look at all the stuff we've done before, all the medals these guys have won. Look at all the stuff that I have done. And it's like, well, that's not important. What is important is now. And he's just, well, no, all of this is bullshit. This is very clearly a political just hatchet job. So, yeah, I mean, it is, again, that's another one of those things, rewatching it, where you go like, oh, right, Kirk isn't like a rebel. Like, he's fully like a believer in the French cause. Like, he's not some guy there against his will. He's like, he's true blue
But
soldier.
I think the difference then between Paths of Glory and Saving Private Ryan is Paths of Glory seems to be so much more clearly about look what war turns people into. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that Saving Private Ryan is making the same sort of statement other than just war is hell.
Well, I
think it's doing that, but I think it's doing it without being it's not doing exactly what Paths of Glory is doing. It's more of a men on a mission movie. So it's showing you what the war's doing to these specific guys, and you're getting these examples of, well, look at this guy. He's ready, like, he doesn't give a shit that Matt Damon's mom lost 3 kids. He just gives a shit about himself. Vin Diesel, he still has some humanity in himself, and he gets killed trying to save the little French girl. You see these, like, when they find the German soldier that kills Giovanni Ribisi, and they're all about to commit a war crime because, well, fuck this guy, this is war, who cares? There's no rules. And Tom Hanks is just like, no, like, we have to remember why we're here and what we're doing. If we give all of this up, we're no better than the other guys. We're no better than who we're fighting. And then what's the point? Like,
I would just counter it too with Private Ryan that I think, my feelings on it have certainly shifted over the years, but I think how you feel about Private Ryan and whether you think it is an anti-war movie and how much you think about the message of the futility of the mission really hinges on how you read that final scene, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a matter of, I know plenty of people, my grandfather, one of them, he wasn't a World War II veteran, he's a Korean War veteran, but like, he looks at a scene like that ending and finds it touching, the idea of, when he's saying like, tell me I lived a good life, right? That,
Right.
But I've always watched it, or not always, but a lot of times I've watched it with the idea of like, okay, you saved Matt Damon's life, right? In theory, you saved his life. And now he is this old man who we know nothing about, like we don't know much about, but there he is in this cemetery. His entire life is haunted by the fact that all of these men died because of an arbitrary rule, basically, in the military that says, well, we can't leave a family with no children, right? He's just, there he is sobbing and begging his wife to say, tell me I lived a good life. Why? Because the one genuinely good man in Private, the Tom Hanks character, looks him in the eyes as he's dying and says, earn this. That all of these men, now, the pressure for somebody like Damon, even though it's not Damon's fault that any of this happened. It's not his fault that any of these people died. An arbitrary decision was made by the military that, well, we got to preserve this family. And now this man carries with him. And again, like, obviously, it's a Spielberg movie. A lot of people go into Spielberg movies expecting, like, I'm going to come away from this feeling upbeat and happy. As opposed to the director we're talking about today, where nobody goes into a Kubrick film expecting they're going to walk out feeling good, even though, I don't know if you guys came across this, an earlier version of Kubrick's script actually had the men being saved at the last minute.
I saw that, and Kirk Douglas fought for the bleaker ending, which I love.
And apparently, man. God damn it.
Apparently there was a lot of conflict between the two. Not like they were fighting, right? But it was one of these things where, like, Kubrick later alleged, like, well, no, I only wanted to do that earlier script because I was concerned about how much Kirk was overtaking the movie or something. Like, it's a whole complicated thing. But I think it's safe to say Stanley has never had a happy ending in any of his films, unless arguably Eyes Wide Shut, I guess, is a happy ending. Is it?
I mean, it ends with Nicole Kidman wanting to have sex, so that's a pretty good ending.
Right?
I don't know.
That is I guess if you read the movie, like if you read the movie as like Tom Cruise is psychologically broken by the end, it's a sad ending. But if you read the movie as like, hey, me and the wife, we finally worked out our problems. Okay, I guess that's positive. That's it. But I don't think he's had a happy ending in any of his films.
He
so
is
it's surprising.
I mean, well, I guess maybe 2001 we've evolved, we will evolve past all of our usual normal human bullshit. Maybe if you want to read it that way, like I mean, yeah, this is not a guy with the greatest track record of pro-human, emotions.
I mean, yeah, I mean, well, I guess depending on your feelings on Barry Lyndon, that's a happy ending because they're all dead.
Well, I think it's a happy
deal with
ending
them anymore.
Well, when Barry Lyndon ends, I am happy because the movie's finally over.
Oh, we feel very differently about Barry Lyndon. In any event, back to Paths of Glory in particular. One thing that's interesting is I thought of it. We're having this debate now about happy endings in Kubrick films. Tom, you alluded to earlier like what World War I was like, and that like a totally different world. I think that's sort of captured in this one great scene with where it is Joe Turkel is talking and having this debate in the barracks, in the bunkers, and they're debating like, well, would you rather get shot or stabbed by a bayonet?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like there's not a conversation about like live or die. It's just like, look, if we're gonna die, right? How do you want to die? And Turkel's ultimate
people aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of getting hurt.
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was such
because everybody dies. We all know that. We just don't want to be in pain. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if that doesn't kind of get to I've read some people who suggest that part of a complaint about this film, I'm not going to say I agree, but a complaint about this film is like that.
Well, I'm going to get ahead of this and say they're wrong.
that we don't really get to know the men who die, right?
Oh, I disagree with that. Yeah.
Right. I disagree with it as well. I think it's just they're not the leads of this movie. I think Kubrick gives you enough to understand who these guys are. I think
I don't even think it's about the leads. It's because we don't even really get much about Kirk. I think it's more just it's an 88-minute movie. It's all about the incident at hand. So we're getting to know these guys through actions and the brief conversations they have with each other. The guy who gets basically set up by his rich classmate to take the fall for this. You just get the little glimpses of like, well, he's got a family, and even if he was poor, he did go to the same school as this guy, so there must be something to this guy. And then each guy's reactions to like, as the clock is ticking down to the inevitable execution. The one guy who just freaks out on the priest, who, you don't even get the sense that he's like an atheist or whatever until that moment, or even in that moment, he's just freaking out like, fuck you, you can't help me, blah, blah, blah. The big idiot who's just like, I'm going to escape. Yeah, nobody's going to help.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael, you were starting to say?
But I think to what both you guys are saying, the efficiency of the storytelling is so brilliant. And, what we are meant to feel, it seems, is how unjust this is. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a 2-hour version of the movie where we get to know each of the three guys a lot more, you don't come away going, oh, now it's more unjust or less unjust. It's not the point. So I don't think we learn everything we need to know to feel, I think, what Kubrick wants us to feel, which is how unjust this is.
I will just say the one ding I will make on this with regarding the three men, and I think it's a ding that even Stanley Kubrick would agree with. Maybe I'm wrong, but you do feel like halfway through the production of this, Stanley Kubrick is watching the dailies of Timothy Carey, who he's worked with before, and going, I don't need this anymore.
He fired him, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he fire him part of the way? But not because of the performance, but because there were like shenanigans.
Well, Timothy Carey is just
in production.
Yeah, he was. I think the performance is partly because Timothy Carey was just going to do what Timothy Carey wanted to do, right? Like, he's a weird guy. I mean, you can watch his. I don't remember exactly what it's called. So somebody can fact check me in the comments. It's something like The Great American Antichrist or whatever. He made his own like feature film starring himself with Frank Zappa doing the music, but he's a very like, he's going to do the performance he wants to give, right? And he is compared to the rest of the cast, like he is very like, he's doing his big stuff, and you almost feel like this is the movie where you start to see like Kubrick couldn't rein in. Not that he wanted to rein in Kirk Douglas, right? But Kirk Douglas was going to give a Kirk Douglas performance. Adolphe Menjou is certainly doing an Adolphe Menjou performance. But it's interesting when you watch this movie, you start to see Stanley find the kind of performances he favors. He's moving away from like the Timothy Carey, like big eyebrow movements. And instead, you have that moment later when Menjou is making the call to Captain Russo when he's telling him, I want you to bomb them, right? Bomb our men. And Captain Russo is on the other end, and he's delivering lines like you expect from a Kubrick character, right? Menjou is doing like, drop the bombs, we need to... And we get to Captain Russo just going, I'm sorry, Captain, I can't do that. No, I don't think I'm good. He's like, it's practically HAL 9000 of just like, I'm sorry. And you really, like, this is where you start to see Kubrick, I think, anyway, like, favor, like, no, I think it's more upsetting if there's less emotion. I think it's more upsetting if the people waltzing just have plastic smiles on their faces and nobody seems to be enjoying the party,
And see, that's...
I will say Joe Turkel... Oh, sorry,
no,
Tom.
please. Go.
No, please, after you.
I will say Joe Turkel gives quite an emotional performance in Paths of Glory, and then obviously, famously, is Lloyd the bartender in The Shining, which is kind of more like the performance you're talking about. Yeah. So, in that case, Kubrick kind of saw someone with the potential to give him the kind of performance he would later be more known for.
Yeah, I just feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but like just seeing Timothy Carey in a number of things and knowing the disputes that they had interpersonally, right? You almost feel like the issue between them was less a matter of like Kubrick having one particular style he wanted and more the idea of like when Kubrick is going, all right, can you give me a take where you say it like this? Or can you give me a take where it's a little lower? The response he got was, no. And that's where I think you see that friction, Yeah,
and you know what? I think the guy was right. I think that sort of style that Kubrick starts getting in his movies after this point, where there are no emotions and you start to wonder if Kubrick's ever met a human being before. I like the performances in this. I like Timothy Carey in this. He's good as every platoon or battalion has the big galoot. Just the guy that's like clearly not bright, who's clearly just like not a bad guy. He's just he's the big dummy. Yeah, yo. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's weird to have the guy that's getting the orders to, friendly fire your own fucking people with bombs, and he's just kind of emotionally, nope, not going to do that.
Well,
Gonna need a written. I think that's just. I don't know. I think it's.
I love that because I think that what you're getting there, because he contrasts so well with Adolphe Menjou, right? Adolphe Menjou is delivering his lines throughout this movie like he's a Shakespeare character, right? Like he's waiting for his moment to do the Henry V monologue, right? Like he's really like and his big flowy cape and all of that, right? And he's on the phone with a man who has just been beaten down by all of this. A man who is dead inside, and it's just like, no, I don't, sir. I'm not going to bomb our own men. Like that's a guy who is just, I don't want to use like the modern parlance and be like a guy who is out of fucks to give, right? But it is a thing of like, no matter how much Menjou is selling you like this romanticized idea of war, right? You almost feel like the guy on the other end of the phone saying like, what's up?
Unless I'm misreading this, I think you've got the actors flipped.
Do I?
Menjou is the guy that Kirk gives the business to at the end.
Okay, I'm missing. So who is
the guy you're
playing?
McCready.
George
McCready. You're right. You're 100% right. I'm just so used to the name Adolphe Menjou from all.
No,
the
because
I
was
just
you're
right. You're 100% right.
No, because I was just looking at it to be like, all right, well, the guy. Apparently, it's Adolphe Menjou. Yeah. I like his version of like kind of what you're saying, which is he's playing it as if none of this really affects him. Mm-hmm. He's putting on the airs, and there's almost that inhuman one percenter thing of just like, oh, I'm above all this, but I'm gonna put on the airs and I'm not gonna get emotional until someone below me just starts telling me the truth, and then he gets really upset. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's just one of the things that's always held me back with Kubrick is, unless you get a Jack Nicholson or a Tom Cruise kind of like going fucking ham, or an Arlie
But that's what I
Erby.
was going to say. There isn't an emotional storm around Nicholson in The Shining. Yeah. There is, there are actors bringing emotion in certain specific roles and often in a big way. And then you're right. There's supporting cast that sort of sometimes can feel like drained of a little humanity.
And I think one thing that's interesting is to talk about the later films and the emotion on it. We're talking about that guy in the trench who gets shell shocked, right? We only see him for one scene, but there is a part of me watching it this time around where I'm like, oh, Stanley remembered this actor, right, and his energy, filed that away for a couple decades, and is like, Vincent D'Onofrio in Full Metal Jacket. Like, this is just okay. The guy who's shell shocked in the trenches of World War I gets slapped in the face and then presumably just gets massacred, right? Vincent D'Onofrio, we're giving him a machine gun. He's not even making it out of basic. He's taking Ermi out with him. It's like it's a remarkable contrast between those two.
Yeah, I think that's part of the kind of give and take conversation these two movies are having with each other. And not, again, I said it before, like, oh, why did he do it? Full Metal, he basically did everything he wanted in this. But, I like Full Metal Jacket, so don't get me wrong. But, it is that interesting give and take of the artist he was here and then the artist he was in Full Metal Jacket, and the different conflicts giving him different avenues to tackle some of these subjects. And maybe over time losing a little less of that, I don't know, positivity he has with human. Like, there is no Kirk Douglas character in Full Metal Jacket. It is just a joyless march to destruction.
But so, by the way, Tom, to that point, and thinking of something you said earlier, Mike, believing in some ways that while this was a World War I movie, in some ways it might have been more a commentary about World War II or any war. You talked about your grandfather serving in Korea. Mm-hmm. This movie was made just a few years after the Korean War ended, and that, in some ways, at least I believe for the American perspective, it's a war without a clear winner. It didn't have
the forgotten war.
The ending. Yeah, the forgotten war. It didn't have the ending that World War I or World War II had. Yep. So in some ways, I also wonder if that recent war and the kind of the way that just felt different to a lot of Americans, and obviously Vietnam to come, that Kubrick did not know, couldn't see the future. But I think it's very much a product of post-Korean conflict, it is a commentary on World War II or World War I.
I think I
think all that post-Korea stuff is definitely a part of what he was looking at. There was something in the air, because even with World War II being the noble war, that was really the war where war became a part of the capitalist machine. We were selling war bonds and, selling all these contracts to these companies to make money off of war. And you start getting the sense that, all right, we just finished World War II, and then 6-7 years later, we're in Korea. We're already back in a war. And if we're in Korea because we're fighting the scourge of communism, well, are we going to get into another war again soon? Which 4 years after Paths of Glory comes out, we are in Vietnam, and that's the fucking the 10-year, 11-year war. However much, there must have been something in the air that Kubrick or Douglas or all of the guys working on this just felt like war has changed at this point. And unless we're wrong, it feels like, which is why I think class is so important in this movie, which is that, war pigs, the rich guys are going to send other people's kids to fight the war. I think they're starting to see, even clearer than past wars, we're now turning it into a business where these rich guys can sit on the sidelines, have their fancy little parties, and be like, "Oh, did you hear we had this success in the field today? Oh, we didn't have a success today, but we'll have one tomorrow. Oh, let's get more champagne and dance." The class aspect of war is going to start getting bigger and bigger, to the point where generals don't even fight anymore. The president is the, commander in chief, and the last president we had that was an actual soldier was it Dwight?
Well, I mean, depending on how you classify,
JFK?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, but
hold on.
But I would counter. Well, no, because George H.W. Bush was a pilot in the war.
He was.
Yeah, and then later CIA director. And
Jimmy Carter was in the Navy.
Yes.
I thought.
But you even look at it now.
And Ronald Reagan made training films, which was just as important. And nobody's allowed to question it.
But even look at that. We got a Reagan, we got a Clinton, we get the fail-son Bush.
But I do just want to weigh in before we get too off the track with that, with what Michael was saying about the Korean War specifically, right? That I think it's important to remember that, the people who are serving in the Korean War, they are the children of people who lived through World War I, and therefore the feeling after World War I, as talked about in a film we've talked about previously, in All Quiet on the Western Front, this feeling of we can never do this again. Remember, America didn't even want to get into World War I. They voted overwhelmingly for Woodrow Wilson, who ran on the idea of, well, unlike Taft and Roosevelt, I can promise you we are not going to get involved in World War I. And then he got us into World War I. Good job, Woodrow. But after World War I, everybody's like, never again. World War II, the power of propaganda was so strong and the power of patriotism was so strong that people were willing to go out and fight for this just cause. And I think what you see with Korea, and it's not until Vietnam, but like what you see with Korea was a lot of guys, my grandfather included, who were like, okay, yeah, no, if the government tells me we need to do this, then we need to do this. This is, this is a just cause. And I think what you see in contrast with, between this and Full Metal Jacket is Kirk Douglas is he's a soldier, but he has that line. They have him make the comment, to the general when he evokes Samuel Johnson's comment about patriotism, right?
Yeah.
And he doesn't say he believes it, right? He just says, there are other thoughts on patriotism. Samuel Johnson said it's the last refuge for scoundrels. And I think what this film and what Douglas represents in this, Douglas is certainly not anti-war or anything like that, but he is kind of representing the idea of like, in any conflict, there should always be somebody on the side going, do we need to do this? Is this actually what needs to be done? Are you sure this is what you want to do? Because blind patriotism can convince you to do some pretty terrible things, and contrast that with Full Metal Jacket, which, you mentioned, Tom, that, we don't have a Kirk Douglas in Full Metal Jacket. We have a Matthew Modine, right? And Kirk Douglas is a guy who has, his principles of honor, right? And he's driven mad by this fraud court and all that. Whereas Modine in Full Metal Jacket, he's a guy who's, he's got his, peace symbol and Born to Kill on his helmet, right? He's Mr. Above It All, right? Yeah. He's Mr. like, no, listen, man, like, maybe these dumb rednecks, they'll be willing to kill, right? But this thing isn't going to break me because I've got my strong hippie morals. And by the end, he is also broken by this. And I think that's in a way how Kubrick responds to Paths of Glory with Full Metal Jacket is that Paths of Glory is the story of a man, Kirk Douglas, an objectively moral man trying to do the right thing, and the system fails, right? These men get executed, and the rest of the men are going to get sent to die. And he's essentially, when he tries to turn somebody in, he gets offered a promotion. Whereas Full Metal
But
Jacket,
essentially doesn't get broken by it, which is
he's not, but even he's disappointed. Like, he can't.
He's disappointed, but
right?
He doesn't have the Joker moment in Full Metal Jacket of the morals are completely broken.
Yeah, Joker is somebody, on the other hand, who feels like he can fix the system from the inside. He can, he won't be broken by it, and he is not, or he is not capable of holding it together.
However,
yeah.
But just like again, with how these movies are in conversation with each other is how they basically have the same ending.
Yeah.
At least the same ending scene of the soldier singing. And it has a different context.
Especially because the German girl who's crying is the future Mrs. Kubrick. Which is such an interesting thing to see. Yes. And I think that, but I agree with you. I agree with you there. Them singing and also the film's relationship to women in general, right? We only have one woman in this movie. And obviously we do see her crying, right? And she's frightened and she sings the song. A song of which we actually have, or somebody in this in the Criterion booklet helpfully translated the lyrics. It is a song called The Faithful Hussar by Franzin Gustav Gerdis, which dates back to the Napoleonic period. So, Kubrick always had his fascination with Napoleon, wanted to make a Napoleon movie, right? Never got a chance. But it's, they note the French soldiers seem to understand the German lyrics, which end with, "Oh, please, mother, bring a light. My sweetheart is going to die." So that is what we hear right before Dax is, is made aware, or right after Dax is made aware that these men are going to be sent off, presumably to die. Right? I think that I think that in a way I would argue that Kirk Douglas' character is broken by this a little bit. I would argue he is broken by what happens. Only insofar as no, he's not having his private Joker moment. But by the end of this, when he finds out the men are being sent out, he can no longer trust that his superiors are going to try and mitigate casualties, right? He can no longer trust that whatever this mission is, they're not sending these guys out specifically.
No, I get that, but I think it's more like what you said before, where it's that he's disappointed because I think if he was broken, he wouldn't have that moment of watching the soldiers change their energy from being like rabid dogs seeing the German girl to kind of slowly showing their humanity and kind of finding a common ground with her and giving them that moment of give them 5 minutes before you tell them it's time to go off.
Sure. I guess what I should clarify is I don't think he's broken in the same way as Private Joker, right?
No. But
let me just make the point real quick, which is that I think Private Joker is, psychologically destroyed by what he saw, whereas what we're dealing with Kirk Douglas is a loss of faith at the end of this movie. Is that he's there and he's going to try and take care of these men under his charge as best he can and try and show them little mercies. But he has lost faith in the system that he, as a superior officer, is supposedly meant to represent. That he can't look these men in the eyes and say that the men up top have their best intentions at heart.
I'm torn about this because I feel like that he lets them have a couple extra minutes makes me think, okay, he's maybe changed. But then on the other hand, the fact that Kubrick uses the same music at the end that he has at the beginning makes me think he's telling us nothing has changed. So I can kind of see both sides of it.
I mean, the only thing that's changed is that Douglas now knows that he can't trust the men up top, right? That he now knows, like, if something.
But you don't think he knows that in the beginning? The tone that Kirk Douglas uses when he first enters the movie and he's getting dressed and the general comes in, his tone to me conveys he knows exactly the kind of bozo he's dealing with. And it's not to say he's not shocked along the way, because he certainly is. Like, he doesn't, there is a disillusionment. But I don't think at the beginning of the movie he thinks the general is some kind of great man of like great integrity or anything.
I don't think he thinks that of the general, right? But I think he thinks it the same way. I guess it's the kind of thing of like, all of us, I think at some point have worked a job where one of our bosses or managers, whatever, is kind of an asshole, right? Not criminal, right? But kind of an asshole, right? And you're like, oh, yeah, whatever. And we all hope that there's going to be a moment. If they ever cross a line, we know there's recourse to that, right? We can go to their higher up, or we can go to HR, or we can go to our union, or whatever we have at that time, right? The disillusionment that Kirk Douglas feels at the end is, I think, from the fact that it's the equivalent of, okay, the boss crossed a line. I went to HR, and HR looked at me and said, how much can we pay you to make this go away? Right? That it's not about, he knows that, I'm not saying he buys into this one general, but it's the fact that the trial was a sham, right? That even when he goes, okay, I can now prove to you that this general made a mistake, the guy goes, cool, you want a promotion? Like, that's what this is about, right? You took him down to get this gig. It's the fact that it's, at the beginning, he's frustrated that the system has allowed some shitty guys to rise, right? Some spoiled rich kids to rise. It's the realization, I think, by the end, that he has no recourse if things go wrong. He cannot, if he couldn't save 3 men being arbitrarily condemned to die by men who are too cowardly to pull the trigger themselves, if he can't even do that, what can he actually do to make things better? It's a little bit like, how many movies do we have about, cops who realize the system's gotten too corrupt and are like, well, shit, I thought if I could bust, if I could go to my boss and say, fucking Alonzo Harris is doing some bad shit, right? That, that's it. That's all it's going to take. But no, I can't. Like, I can't, you got to, Dirty Harry style, throw your badge away. That's where I think Douglas is by the end.
No, I get all that. I think we're kind of just really splitting hairs on where we think the line for his character to be destroyed really is. Because I think him having... Because he sees the soldiers at first being like just animals when the German girl comes out, and he's disgusted. That's where you think the movie's going to end, where he's like, he can't even like be there for his men anymore because he's seen how the poison has flown through every aspect of the military. But the fact that he's able to see that at least these guys, the guys under my command, not the rich fucks, but the poor guys that are going to get thrown into the fucking line of fire, at least they can pull back at a certain point and still show humanity. All right, I'm still going to be here for these guys. I'm going to give them 5 more minutes of just genuine human connection. Because if he didn't switch, if he still had that look of disgust on his face and this change in them didn't like affect him, you would have probably expected him to be like, when that guy comes up, it's like, oh, well, we got to go. He would have probably been like, fine, whatever. Tell him to go, like, whatever. I think but I don't think Kirk Douglas comes out of the end of this movie better than he did at the beginning of the movie. But I think, especially in conversation with Full Metal Jacket, it is less of a downer than Joker's arc.
Oh, I don't disagree with that at all.
No, I think that's kind of like what I think that's just like the kind of hair splitting of what we ultimately think is Kirk Douglas's feelings or whatever at the end of the movie. I don't think either of us, all 3 of us, would disagree that he's not a happy camper at the end of this movie. But yes, Michael.
I don't know. I could be wrong. Full Metal Jacket feels so much more Vietnam specific to me in certain ways, whereas Paths of Glory, as we've discussed, could be many wars, if not any war.
Yeah.
That because of that, the ending of Paths of Glory in some ways is more bleak because the Vietnam War is over. You know, there's a specificity to Vietnam to Full Metal Jacket, that as bleak as that ending is, I don't know. It's a little, to me, less all encompassing, that downer feeling, because it's specific to a war, as opposed to Paths of Glory to me feeling like this is what war does to men, and this is what that like, if there are any wars, this is going to happen.
I think that's such an interesting point, though, Michael, because I hear what you're saying, right? But my experience with Full Metal Jacket is not so exclusive to that, and that is because through a weird coincidence, the first time I ever saw Full Metal Jacket, I was at a friend's house. We were both in Boy Scouts, and I went over to his house after a Boy Scout meeting, and he was like, "You want to watch Full Metal Jacket?" Which was a choice. But it was the same week that the Abu Ghraib scandal was all over the news, right?
Interesting.
And so for me, as a young, like, politically inclined but not that aware of politics in a way, right? That when Abu Ghraib scandal is out on the news, and also my dad's friends are all talking about how much they love 24, right? Like, it's a weird kind of confluence in a way. Like, but yeah, it's not necessarily the whole timeline as it works out, but just I remember seeing Full Metal Jacket the week, and that Abu Ghraib's all over the news. And for me, that feeling of like, oh, in the 80s, we all tricked ourselves into thinking that's the last time we'll ever do that. You know what I mean? Even though in the 80s, the only difference was that the CIA was like, don't worry, we'll make it so nobody has to see the stuff we're doing. And Bush is still going to get Noriega out. It's going to be a whole thing, but we're going to make sure you don't see it. And this was like, so I guess in my mind, like, that's where Full Metal Jacket feels.
Right. No, I see that. That's so interesting. It's obviously always like who you are and when you see a film and all that stuff that has a huge impact on all of us. I think I saw Full Metal Jacket in 88 or 89 at sleepaway camp, and I was way too young to see it. And it was really disturbing because I was probably 10.
Yeah.
And then I saw it again as a teenager. But that's so interesting what you're saying.
I just want to point out, Michael, I think you just said a universal thing, which is I think for all men of our age, right, or roughly our age group, you're not going to find one who's going to say, I saw Full Metal Jacket the first time at an appropriate age. That's just one of those ones. I think that's up there with, like, I don't know, like Nightmare on Elm Street, where it's like, no, everybody saw that when they shouldn't have seen it. We all saw things we didn't know.
We all remember the first time we saw Jackie Earle Haley walk out in that fedora.
For God's sake.
Poltergeist. There's a lot of movies we saw.
Yeah, 100%.
I also think just when in terms of like this conversation with Full Metal Jacket, Paths of Glory, is that I think there's a few things I could say. Is that one, I think the fact that this one at least ends with the sense that there still can be some humanity found in a war, even if it is going to crush you up and grind you down. People can still have a sense of humanity. Bringing out the German girl, like, especially in a movie, 13 years after World War II ended, and kind of making that connection of like, hey, like, we're still human beings here, and we can have that. Where Full Metal Jacket is a movie that is made 26 years after the start of Vietnam, like 10 years, whatever, 13 years after the end of Vietnam. So it's has this longer viewpoint of what's the country's become since Vietnam, and how, especially since Kubrick became an expat, a Brooklyn boy who ended up living in England, having that ability to see both sides of America as an insider and an outsider, seeing what the 80s really did to America, and the way that movie's ending with the soldiers singing is a lot more unsettling in how it's saying the war machine is just here to turn all of our young men into mindless, propaganda-filled killers with no personalities, just marching in line, whistling along to what is the Mickey Mouse
It's
song?
Mickey Mouse, yeah.
Yeah.
Mickey.
So it just has this sense of, 30 whatever years after making Paths of Glory and seeing what this country has gone through in it and outside of it, that there is no sense of a happy ending with the military anymore. It is a completely soul crushing experience. Especially like Mike bringing up the CIA stuff and all, like the way there really was just no good sense of, as much as the 80s, they were trying to make us think, the military and national security and all that was good, that if you actually look at it, it's actually worse because we're not doing anything good anymore.
Well, I mean, yeah, but of course, and I may be sketchy on my history, but I'm pretty sure around that time, Oliver North went to prison for Iran-Contra, right? We cleared out all the people who did that, right? We definitely fixed
never heard
all of that, and he definitely isn't writing novels and on Fox News all the time now, right? Not at all. Not at all.
No, absolutely not.
Everybody. And that's why George H.W. Bush didn't win the election, because of Iran-Contra, right? That's all. We know that's all how that worked out in the 80s. And it's good to know nothing was fixed ever. It's nice to know Kubrick makes this film in 1957, and he's like, the system's broken, and we all watched it and went, cool. Guess I don't know, man. We ain't fixing it.
Well, it's crazy to think also he makes this, it's set in 1916, so that would be making a movie now set in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's not, which doesn't feel like that long ago. When you say, when I think of Kubrick making this movie, I think, World War I was a long time before he made Paths of Glory. And I'm like, 1983 doesn't feel like it was that long ago. So
this is all building up to us, Michael, pitching you right now as an award-nominated screenwriter, write an Iran-Contra movie. Just do it. You've got enough cachet.
I guess there hasn't been a definitive. There hasn't been a definitive movie of that scandal yet.
No,
so it's,
closest we've got. No, this is entirely on you. And you know what? Again, you've got the cachet, and actors love reading your dialogue and saying your dialogue. So people are going to be lining up to play Fawn Hall shredding documents. It's there for you. And you know what? Play it for laughs if you want. You write great comedy. Play it for laughs. Have her drop some documents in the shredder on accident. You're welcome to do it,
Hey, listen, maybe that's what the final season of Stranger Things is going to be. They've ripped off and copied so many other 80s things. The final season's just Full Metal Jacket.
That was actually, I'm not joking, Bella, my partner and I were at the American Girl doll store recently getting a gift for somebody, and they were like, well, this American Girl lived through the 80s. And I just kept saying to him, like, I really hope that the book is about Iran-Contra. I hope.
This American Doll has known so many people that died of AIDS.
No, it's, you know what? It's actually, you'd think, like, we make jokes. I was talking to an employee, but like she's in the 80s. She's got a Pac-Man machine. Like, what's her traumatic event? And she goes, well, she watched the Challenger explosion. And I went, oh, yeah. No, yeah, that's shit. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Apparently the newest one is 1999, and I'm dying to know what they witnessed in 1999. Is it just about getting Phantom Menace tickets? I don't know, but I want to find
They went to school in Colorado.
We really don't know. It's very bizarre. But anyway, all of that to say, and all of that preamble to say, Michael H. Weber, thank you so much. Wait, I got to do Oscars. How did I forget that? I forgot.
Well, before we do Oscars, with all this talk about how dark and upsetting and how clearly Kubrick's not a very positive fella, I do like that there is little bits of some characters getting comeuppance at the end of the movie. Like, I love that Kirk Douglas is able to finagle that guy, the rich guy who went to school with the other soldier, and it's like, oh yeah, you're not doing this for any personal reasons, right? Oh, good, of course, I knew you wouldn't do that. By the way, you're leading the execution squad. You're gonna have to put a bullet in everyone's head. And the guy's like, please, can I not do that? And it's like, no, fuck you, you're doing it.
Yeah,
I'm dropping the mask. I know what you did, motherfucker. And then, as much as it's a political thing and blah blah blah, he does get that general to. It's like, yeah, you're gonna have to go in front of a fucking an investigation now, and we have evidence. You're probably not going to get in front of a firing squad, but for rich guys like you, they're probably going to knock you down a rank or two, or maybe just drum you out of the army instead, and just, you'll still be rich and not dead, but I still got you, motherfucker. So, like, there's a little bit of that, which is just like, hey, at least Kirk got somebody, a little bit of a kick to the nuts for a few guys in this movie. I like that.
No, the comeuppances are great.
So, winding down as we always do, Tom, how do you think Paths of Glory fared at the Academy Awards that year?
I think it got nothing.
That is correct. It got no Oscar nominations. However, it was nominated for the BAFTA for Best Film, and it got a WGA Award nomination. So, we're on the right path.
Well, give me some of these other nominations so I can be mad at what took its slot.
You probably won't be too mad. So the other
Don't speak for me.
I'm
always angry.
So the Best Picture nominees that year were 12 Angry Men.
Okay.
Peyton Place, Sayonara, Witness for the Prosecution.
Hell yeah.
And the winner, The Bridge on the River Kwai.
I mean,
now
listen, there's 2 movies that Paths of Glory could have taken the spot, but there's 3 of those movies that are just like, hell yeah, let's go.
And it's worth noting, when you say there's 2 movies, you have not seen Peyton Place nor Sayonara.
That still doesn't mean I'm not going to be mad about.
Don't get me wrong.
Paths of Glory.
I would also put Paths of Glory in above Peyton Place and Sayonara, but I just want it noted to people that as of now, you have no context for either Peyton Place or Sayonara.
I am an American, and I am allowed to be angry about things I'm ignorant about.
Well, speaking of Americans, it's also worth noting, if you were an American, you could see this movie, whereas if you were French, this movie was banned there for a good stretch of time. So,
which is funny because the first time I watched it, it took me about like 70 minutes to be like, oh wait, is Kirk Douglas supposed to be French? Because I know that's just how movies were at the time. Like, they didn't even attempt accents or whatever, but like, especially the soldiers on trial are so just like guys from Brooklyn that I was just like, oh, they're French. Oh. And okay.
I do have to just lastly note, before we sign off and all, I do have to lastly note, timing-wise, this made quite a feature to watch with the Paris Olympics as my backdrop. I just need to say it. It was a weird contrast. But, Michael, thank you so much for joining us again.
Seriously, dude.
We hope to have you back. However, I do want to warn you now, no Kirk Douglas film next season. So I don't know if that's a deal breaker for you.
Wait, that's it? He has no more in the...
Oh, he has more down the line. I'm just saying next season, it's not a Kirk Douglas movie. So that's going to be tough.
Interesting. All right, I'll have to look at the list.
We'll have to look it over. But
thank you guys so much. This was really a blast.
We always love having you on, and I said it last time, and I mean it sincerely. The one thing I'm so grateful for is the fact that you're so busy working on writing and all of these projects that you don't have time to do a full podcast, because we would be out of work at that point. Like, you really do. It's we always love having you on. Such great stuff to say. But as we send you off, do you have anything you want to plug? Do you have any kind of socials? Anything you want to let folks know about on the?
I'm writing some things I can't talk about. So right now, I would just say go to the movies. We just need everybody to go to the movies. That's probably the most important thing right now. So, hopefully soon I'll have a couple things in the pipeline I can say a little more.
Well, I mean, we spoiled you're working on the definitive Iran-Contra movie, right? We've spoiled that now on the episode, but you're working on it.
We're pending a deal on that one.
They're talking to Oliver North to make a cameo.
But I got to ask you guys: can anything top Phil Hartman playing Ronald Reagan in that SNL sketch? I believe they call it Mastermind.
Yes. Oh, the best.
Where, when the door closes and you realize he knows all too well everything that's going on.
Oh, well, how many Girl Scout cookies did you sell? That's very nice. Have a good day. All right, cut the crap. So this is what the Soviets are doing next.
I don't think I can top that sketch. So,
I mean,
you know what? I'm going to put a plug in for Phil Hartman as Ronald Reagan in the SNL sketch Mastermind. That's my plug.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to having you back on. But everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
So one of the things that we were discussing, one of the focal points of Paths of Glory is the dissatisfaction and kind of systemic shock that comes from realizing that the apparatus, the military apparatus, has failed, and looking at sort of the absurdity of it, right? Obviously, Paths of Glory is not a comedy like something like Dr. Strangelove is, but nevertheless, there's something inherently absurd about what they're being asked to do. And I could have gone with some more obvious parallels or things, but there's a film that jumped out to me that is from roughly the same time. It's from the year 1960. And the actual film is actually an American-Czechoslovakian co-production. But the core creative team is all American, and it's based on the writings of Jules Feiffer, who is one of our great comic strip writers and satirists. It's a short film. It's about 8 minutes long, and it won the Academy Award. It is an animated short called Monroe. And I know a lot of times on this show I like to say, like, oh, Tom, I think you'd enjoy this, but at 8 minutes, Tom would really enjoy Monroe, because the entire premise of this satirical short is Monroe is a 4-year-old boy, like, a 4-year-old, like toddler, basically, a 4-year-old kid who one day mistakenly gets a letter from the drafts board saying he's being drafted into the military. This is a short from 1960. He's getting drafted into the military, and he keeps going through the process, meeting with the drafts board, meeting with the doctors, meeting with the sergeant, and he keeps just trying to tell him, I'm only 4 years old. And because the military is distracted by war propaganda, and they're distracted by, oh yeah, no, you're not 4 years old. You're just claiming you're 4 years old to get out of serving in the military. And all of this, it just becomes this escalating cycle of this 4-year-old child being put in a helmet and handed a gun and told to go fight because nobody believes he's actually 4. It's a fun, bitingly satirical short that is all about the absurdity of the American military apparatus, and also the absurdity of our concept of masculinity and honor in this country. Without spoiling the short too much, in Monroe, the boy is ultimately, even though he got drafted, and even though he's out there just trying to say, like, I want to go home to my mommy, like, I am a baby, like, what are we doing? In the end, when the error is finally recognized, he's used as a propaganda tool to go, look at this brave young child who wanted to serve his country. It's a great satirical short, and obviously, like, setting that aside, the fact that you have the great Jules Feiffer, one of our great writers, great comic artists, making this film and winning the Oscar for this film, I think that needs to be preserved for a number of reasons. It's a great satirical animated short. It is an animated short that doesn't look like any other animation from the mainstream studios of the time. I mean, it literally had to get made behind the Iron Curtain. And again, for the representation of Feiffer and all of that, I think Monroe from 1960, the Academy Award-winning short, is my pick for the National Film Registry.
All right. So with this one, I had a few options for this angle that the movie really got me interested in, which is the courtroom movie. And in this case, the courtroom movie where things just do not go right. So I had a few options with that, but then one came upon me that really does tie into Paths of Glory about the military and how the military system is kind of fucked. And the chain of command is a really, like, weird, fucked up thing that can cause people to do horrible things, and then they get thrown under the bus for it, and the guys higher up can kind of just get away with it pretty easily. It's one of my favorite movies, even though the guy who kind of created it's a bit of a dopey dipshit these days. I'm picking A Few Good Men. I think it is one of the great movies of the 90s. It's another Rob Reiner masterpiece in that run of his. Tom Cruise is great. Jack Nicholson's great. The way the courtroom stuff plays out is great. The look at the military is great. Obviously not as bleak or miserable as Paths of Glory is. But it finds a way to sort of play in a similar game that Paths of Glory is playing. And while it may end up with the big revelation of, you can't handle the truth, where Jack fucks himself over and gets himself caught for doing the bad thing that the movie is all about, it does still have that melancholic kind of realistic ending of, oh, well, these soldiers on trial are still fucked too. That the best thing that could happen to them is that at least, like, we know it's proven that they weren't just doing things on their own accord, that they were kind of led astray by the system. I think it's one of the great, like I said, one of the great movies of the 90s, one of the best legal thrillers, courtroom dramas. Rob Reiner's run that he was on from, like, This Is Spinal Tap to I think maybe American President was the last one. I can't remember, it's off the top of my head. Needs to be preserved. Like, that run was just unbelievable. And it's just one of my favorite movies. I'm a sucker for a courtroom drama, and this is one of the best. Sorkin may be an absolute Momo most of the time these days. God have mercy on his soul for being the Ricardos, but the man made good work at one point. So, got to give him cred where cred's due. So I'm putting up A Few Good Men. That's my pick, and you could deal with it. Deal with it in the comments, bitches.
Next week,
Kyle Lampard joins us to talk about Salt of the Earth.
I will say many of the people that are put on that blacklist, the Hollywood and 10 included, did feel trapped when navigating a lot of those inquiries, because the very acknowledgement of being on that list, whether they were or not, was a condemnation. It was a sign one way or the other. So they really didn't have a choice but to act. And if they were going to, some decided they would be loud and vocal because they were damned if they did or damned if they didn't. You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natali and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kyle Lampard and edited by Mike Natali and Kyle Lampard. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be fucking real, I ain't sticking to a goddamn schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.